Well,
That's great.
okay.
Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to Be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Westchester County Executive George Latimer. In his 4th year as Westchester County Executive, he was first elected to the Rye Town Council, then to the county legislature in 2004, the state senate in 2012, and defeated Robert Astorino in 2018 for county executive. Thank you for being with us today.
John, always a pleasure to be with you.
Right. Now, starting off your 4th year with twin crises lurking, COVID and cash, how can you and your team bring Westchester back big time?
Well, I think the first thing is that we're dealing in the pandemic with a nationwide issue, internationally, worldwide, but for our governmental purposes, a nationwide issue. So what we have to do is our part as part of a larger whole. Right now, we have to do certain basic things. We have to make sure that we have testing in as many places as is possible to make sure people who know they have the disease isolate so they don't spread the disease anymore. This is nothing new. We've heard this for 11 months.
Yeah.
But we have robust testing in Westchester County now. We're testing 10,000 to 12,000 people a day. And I've been tested twice, both times negative. But a test isn't a final judgment on a person's infection. It's a snapshot of that moment. And we need to continue that in all of our endeavors in order to open schools, in order to have athletic competitions, and in everyday comings and goings. That'll be with us for a while. And of course, the bigger issue that we have to deal with is vaccinating everybody. And we don't know yet if a vaccine is going to be required every year, as it does with the flu, or what. But right at the moment, we know that we need a 2-shot vaccine, you and I as individuals, to be relatively safe from getting COVID in the short term, or in the present term. And so right now, between the county center that we partner with the the state government at, and then also the county health clinic here in White Plains, both locations in White Plains, which from a White Plains perspective is good news. There are 2 sites right here in the community that's proximate. The county clinic is doing somewhere in the vicinity of 300 some odd people a day of vaccinations. The county center is doing 1,100 people a day.
Yeah, that's what I estimated. Yeah.
Right. So in the aggregate, we're closing in on 1,500 people a day, and that number could expand if we had more doses available. So the doses become available, and then we vaccinate more people. The more people we vaccinate, we reach a point at which the economy can start to reopen, and that's how Westchester, to go to your question, that's how Westchester comes back. We come back from COVID when we have less of a fear that people have of getting the disease, and the money will follow the opening of the society. As the society opens, people will feel more comfortable going out, buying things, sales tax revenue would rise, hotel tax revenue would rise, other revenue streams would get better, and then we find our way back to normalcy.
Yeah. Now on the vaccinations, Open Door Westchester put out a news release yesterday about the worry that some 40% of the people of color population may not want to get vaccinated. Now, are there any programs or reach outs that the county is planning to
Yes,
bring
in
them
fact, more than planning, they're underway.
Yeah.
There's 2 things to keep in mind. There are concerns that people have about taking the vaccine that represent the natural hesitancy for anything that's new. How will it affect me? What will the likelihood of it being effective be? What's in it? As if you could tell me what was in it and I would know. Things that hasn't been out there for a long time. How do we know what the long-term effects are? Those are the kind of concerns that could come anywhere, from anybody in any circumstances. And then we know that in communities of color, where we have high populations of African Americans, of Latinx, maybe some other ethnicities, we're concerned that they've had a historic bad experience with the healthcare system, and certainly in vaccinations. And in those cases, John, you can't lecture people. You have to persuade them. You have to give them people who are professionals, who look like them, come from within their community, to try to talk in a very reasonable way. We have already put out, and we're working on some public service announcements. We're doing COVID town hall meetings in the evenings on camera, so that people can watch and see that. We printed some material, and working with local governments and some of these community agencies, try to get the word out.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the labor problem? Westchester unemployment is down 9.2% in 1 year. Can these jobs come back?
Well, I think, just as we said a second ago, nothing is possible until we put the COVID situation in the rearview mirror, or certainly that we clearly as a society are getting ahead of it. Many of the jobs we've lost in the society are hourly wage jobs, jobs that tie into restaurants, hotels, other entertainment venues that have been closed.
Right.
And when those things reopen, those jobs come back. It's not as if we had a factory and the factory closed and then all those jobs disappeared and they're never coming back. If we can get back to some degree of strength, then we're going to see some of those jobs come back. What you're also noticing in White Plains, I think, is you're noticing everywhere, more people are buying things online now than ever before.
Yeah.
And that's a shift. And right across the street we have the Galleria Mall from where we're having a conversation. That was everything in 1980. 40 years later, it's just about empty. And that's a concern that has nothing to do with COVID that has to be addressed.
Right. What is the Westchester business community telling you about what they need to get back from the county on a pre-2020 pace?
Well, I think we've worked very closely with the business community, both locally, the White Plains BID, Business Improvement District, which is White Plains backyard issues, and then with the broader associations, the Business Council of Westchester, the Westchester County Association. We took $10 million of COVID care funds, and we turned it into direct grants to small businesses. And we were able to help a significant number of businesses in the county, and we did that working through those organizations to show that we stood behind them. Now, there isn't a Chamber of Commerce in White Plains, it's the BID, but with those communities that have chambers of commerce, we've been directly involved in getting funding to them as well. There are some places where the county owns facilities, and we have retail operations that pay us rent, and we have foregone the rent to try to help keep them afloat, or pushed off the obligations at the airport and other places, coachmen, to show that we're trying to be sensitive to the economic moment. To the extent that the county this big can do these things, the federal government this big has to do those things.
Right. Now, small businesses are being aided by COVID funds. You granted them. Could you explain how that is working out? Any feedback? How are the
Well, I
funds
think in
being
general, first of all, the small businesses that have been benefited by it are appreciative, and it was money they didn't expect to get, and it was grant money, not loan money, so they don't have to worry about paying it back. The classic example where it was well used, if we gave a $40,000 grant to a restaurant sometime in July, they were able to buy warming stanchions, put those warming stanchions outside, and where normally they wouldn't be able to have outside dining in October and November, they stretched out their revenue stream. Now, we're having this conversation in January. Outdoor dining in January in this area is impossible. There's nothing you can do to help really make that work. But that kind of assistance helps. You get a small mom and pop retail store, they get some money, they put up some plexiglass, they protect their employees, they protect their guests, customers who come in. That was a helpful way to use the money. Everyone used it a bit differently.
All right. Are there new businesses coming into Westchester? Amazon is one. Are there programs to promote now that Westchester is a good destination to come on in?
Well, I think right now you're getting a reaction by organizations that are based in the city, that are very worried about the mass transit to go into the city and the congestion of Manhattan subways, and all of that stuff is really affecting people wanting to go into the city. So there's a greater demand to look at Westchester County commercial real estate, and so that demand is helpful. There's even more demand for Westchester residential real estate, where people will move out of the city because they prefer the extra elbow room of here. I think White Plains 287 is uniquely benefited because you've got office space availability that can be used to at least house some version of people that would otherwise go into the city. We have Morgan, which has major operations over in Harrison, is going to be adding a number of employees this year, significant number of employees. That's a positive sign. It's not always the direct a program of incentives that we offer to everybody. It's when we know that there's interest. How do we use the Industrial Development Agency of the county to help incentivize a business coming in by lowering their sales tax obligations, lowering other taxing obligations? I should point out, the IDA, the acronym that everybody knows, White Plains does not have its own IDA, and I have supported as a state legislator White Plains getting its own IDA. But while that hasn't happened, and it only can be authorized by the state, the county IDA performs that function for White Plains. We've worked very closely with the administration and the Common Council. If the day comes where White Plains can get its own IDA, we congratulate them for it. We support that, but in the meantime, our IDA is working to help incentivize projects. And I must tell you, I have never seen more building cranes in White Plains than I'm looking at right now. For better or for worse, however you want to assess it, there is an energy in White Plains in construction that is greater than I have seen in my adult lifetime. Now, once upon a time, when the big explosion of urban renewal in the 60s and the growth of those days would have exceeded what we're seeing today. But other than that, you know, you can look out the window and you can see White Plains with a lot of
Yes, I
demand.
see the Mitchell right now out the window here. We're interviewing from the McCallion building with County Executive George Latimer, giving us some time out of his extremely busy days. What initiatives do you have to make Westchester attractive to businesses moving up from the NYC?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that we've done, which I think is probably unexpected, was to cut property taxes a little bit for the last 2 years. You know, look, there's a political narrative out in the world which says that Democrats will raise taxes and Republicans will cut taxes. I don't want to speak on the other side of the ledger, but as a Democrat, you know, that was sort of the rap. The last 2 years, in the 2020 budget and now the 2021 budget, we've made a cut to Westchester County property taxes. And then somebody might say, well, you added to the sales tax. Well, if we didn't add to the sales tax in White Plains, White Plains' sales tax remains what it was before. In fact, it helped White Plains merchants and Yonkers and Mount Vernon and New Rochelle because we brought other communities up to the same level. And so the competitive disadvantage, if sales tax means that much,
Yes.
I'm not sure it means that much. When you're buying an $80 pair of jeans and you're buying them in White Plains, do you really want to jump in a car and drive to another community to save, you know, what amounts to a couple of dollars on sales tax?
No.
But nonetheless, by equalizing sales tax in other communities with White Plains, we help White Plains businesses.
Right.
And then I think we've helped White Plains and everybody else by cutting property taxes. Now, I'm not going to promise what I don't know that I can deliver. We're going to find out what the state is going to do to try to resolve their budget problems and how that hits the county. We're going to find out if the federal government is going to help us further as they have last year. If they
Cross
do
your
those,
fingers.
we cross our fingers.
Yes, right.
If they do those things, then I'm in a better fiscal position than otherwise. If they don't, I'm not. But at least we've shown in the last 2 years we could cut property taxes, and that message gets through to people in New York City. Come to the suburbs. You have a beautiful, vibrant center of the county, and the tax burden is going to be dealt with.
Right. So, any news from Washington on how close that very needed stimulus is?
Well, I think the President has offered a $1.9 trillion package to the Congress. It appears, as you might imagine, to have the support of the House, run by the Democrats. The Senate, it's a one-vote margin. It's as tiny a margin as you could get. And I don't know that every Democrat is prepared to vote for it. I don't know that every Republican is prepared to vote against it. But we'll see what its progress is. If it makes it through at a $1.9 trillion, there is money allocated in that for state support and local government support, which will be welcomed and needed, and we will put it to good use. As we mentioned, the $10 million that we used for the small business support, $4 million that we set aside for food insecurity, we use the money wisely and well.
Right. Now, getting back to the unemployment problem, is lack of daycare contributing to the large rate of unemployment?
It is part of the factor, to be sure, and that's why we've taken the initiative as a county to create remote learning centers, you know, daycare centers, but with an educational component to it in different parts of the county. Rosie Finizio from our team, who has a background in early childhood education, has gone forward to do some of those things. We're opening one in Pelham just this weekend as we're having this interview. And, you know, it's it's difficult, John, because the city government and county government is only so big. We're big, but we're not that big. We can do certain things. And so by having a few of these remote learning centers, we're showing the path of where we can go. It still will take more commitment at the higher levels of government to make the difference.
Right. You are providing remote learning centers for essential workers.
That's correct.
Explain how that works.
Well, essential workers would be people that, you know, clearly have to work. If you're talking about the obvious first responders, police and fire, EMS workers. In our world, correction workers, people who are teachers, people who drive buses. You need to have those people working at their jobs. You can't afford for them to be home watching their children because there's no other place to go.
Certainly not.
And if you can create the right kind of environment for these kids, during this period of time, then they'll go through this dead zone of the pandemic, and they'll still be able to pick up some things, learn some things as necessary before they get to the point of going to school-age education.
Right. Unfinished business, Playland, you made a settlement standard of amusements, and the county, as I understand it, is totally responsible for the infrastructure improvements. Well, how much will you bond for?
Well, we have a commitment now to do well over $100 million worth of improvements at Playland. You know, look, here's the reality of it.
Yeah.
My predecessor signed a deal to turn over the park for 30 years to Standard Amusements. We came in, we analyzed the deal, we thought it was a poor deal. In trying to abrogate the deal, the bankruptcy court judge said, no, you're not going to abrogate the deal, you don't have a basis for it. So then, you know, from that position, we negotiated the best possible arrangements we could. That's what we have now. The county has certain obligations, and they're significant, and we're going to meet them. Standard has certain obligations, and I have confidence that they're going to meet them. At the end of the day, if these things work properly, there'll be some working adjustments on it before it's all done. Playland will start to get better. It started to improve in 2019. We put a lot of creativity. Catherine Chaffee and my team here did a lot of things to help Playland kind of rebound from 4 very low years. And I'll hope and look forward to seeing an improvement at Playland. Keep in mind one more thing, though. While the pandemic goes on, the governor has not lifted his prohibition of amusement parks opening. So we couldn't open all of 2020, and we're going to see what happens in 20. We're going to see what happens in 21. Boardwalk, beach, nature preserve open. The amusement park itself not open.
Right. The airport now in limbo because of decline in general aviation and commercial flights due to lack of air travel. How are your plans for the airport coming back? The master plan.
Everything is on ice until we get through the pandemic. You have practically no commercial flights going out of that airport. That's 20% of the traffic at the airport. That's the one we see. We drive up to the front terminal, we go and we have a ticket, we go through security, we get on a plane. 80% of that airport is general aviation, and not just, you know, one guy or two guys in a plane flying someplace. It's heavily corporate driven, corporate owned jets, as well as jets that are available for contracted use by corporate individuals, and that is a great reason why we manage to get the economic development we get in this area, because we have corporations that know they have an airport nearby. But the master plan process, which is very important, we had to put on hold because we want a community dialogue about the airport, and then develop a master plan, do the environmental, have the Board of Legislators approve it, and then lock it in. Now, when I say community dialogue, that's not just the people who live near the airport, because people who live near the airport, they obviously have skin in the game, but they hear the noise. We have to talk to the whole county, and the whole county has to be engaged. What do you want this airport to be is important to you? Because what I suspect is there's a lot of people that benefit from the airport, but they don't feel the urgency to come out and express it. And so you need to have that balance when you're analyzing what the future of the airport is.
Right. Affordable housing last year was a huge priority. You did a survey that showed an 82,441 unit deficit in affordable housing availability. Is that on hold? What is the plan to continue narrowing the gap? Incentives for developers?
Well, I think the realities are that right now we're working on about 1,400 units of affordable housing. You know, we've opened 36 units in Westchester. I was over there literally this past weekend, and 14 units are occupied, and we saw people moving in. That's a very small example. 75 units right outside the gate of Westchester Community College at the old West Help site. That, I believe, has got move-in situations going on shortly. We need affordable housing of all types everywhere. We've helped support projects from Peekskill all the way down to the southern tier. You must remember, though, we are bouncing back from our predecessor administration that did not believe in affordable housing and only agreed to do that portion of affordable housing which was mandated by the court suit, which we have now, you know, substantively proved to the court that we're serious about affordable housing. So it's not that affordable housing is on hold, John. We're moving forward, but we're not moving forward as robustly as we could if the pandemic had lifted, and then we knew we were in a position to start full board development.
Mm-hmm. Now, the COVID situation. Does the County Commissioner of Health, Dr. Amler, feel that the infection rates averaging around 850 a day countywide, are not going to hospitalize at the same 5% hospitalization rate. Is she confident about that?
Well, I don't know, projecting forward,
Yeah.
it's hard to be confident about anything. I think Dr.
Oh,
Amler,
good
Dr.
point.
Charlita Amler, our
Yeah.
Commissioner of Health, Dr. Dial Hewlett, Dr. Ada Wong, all the rest of the medical professionals, they're looking at a set of variables where the virus has really become more robust since October-ish. And we've had quite a bad run of it during the holidays, peaks in Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Now the peaks are starting to leaven down a little bit, but no St. Patrick's parades, no ball drops in
Right.
Renaissance Square. So the public activities have really come dribbled down to nothing in the society. So the virus spread is happening in personal interactions. I think from a pure health department standpoint, they know we're not out of the woods yet. They know that while there's light at the end of the tunnel, we still have tunnel to go to get to the light. And they want us to continue to
That's true.
show, they still want us to show diligence and so forth. On the other hand, I have to put some pressure to try to have as much normalcy as we can. And if normalcy means you can play golf at a golf course, or you can bicycle Sunday, we expanded this past year, I think we'll do it again this year. Those kinds of efforts where we know that the activity is socially distanced is a good thing to do. Where we think it's problematic, then we don't do it. Such as we lost all of our fireworks programs. You can't have wonderful fireworks. White Plains has theirs at the high school
Yeah.
field. It's great fun, but you're too close together. And
Right.
so you have to sacrifice that.
Yeah. Does Dr. Amler believe that the new COVID infections now result in less severe cases, and are they being treated more effectively?
Well, you know, I don't think we
That's my
know.
impression.
I don't think we know. We talk about this, and medical science is not of one mind. The advice we get builds off of our observation. We have as many active cases right now as we've had at almost any time in the peak. A little below the very peak, which is 12,000. We're about 11,000 right now. However, we aren't hospitalized at the same number, probably about half as many hospitalized. That may be the way the patients are identified and treated at the outset of their illness. It may be that there are some, you know, if you catch somebody early and you can give them some cocktail, as former President Trump got, of certain things, that you get better results from that. Whatever it is, however, it's still very fatal. And even if the rate of fatality and the rate of serious illness is reduced, there are still plenty of our neighbors that are suffering. So we're not out of the woods.
On the COVID vaccine situation, do we have a handle on how many teachers and educators have been vaccinated? 50%, 75%, less than 50? White Plains says they're willing to open the schools once all staff and teachers are
Right.
vaccinated. Dr. Ricca mentioned that this week to me.
Right.
What is the handle on the education
I
vaccination?
don't think we're above 50%. You know, it's hard for me to speak for a specific district. I don't think we're above 50% for educators, although I think we're not far below that number. And if the
That would
target
be
number,
great.
well, and if the target number 70, 75% was still below what we need to have,
Yeah.
the problem still goes back to number of doses that we have access to. Because of what we're doing at the county center and other locations, if we got the doses, we could pump it up. We've been doing that from a White Plains perspective. We've been doing that for the White Plains firefighters. And we're on a situation wherever at the clinic up the block, whenever we know we're going to have some leftover product at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to shut down operations at 5, we call over and we say, hey, do you have any firefighters on duty right now that want it, that you can give them the vaccine? Bang, they send us over 10 people, we get 10 people inoculated. And we're 10 people closer to keeping all of your firefighters on the job and duty and so forth. That process can happen with the education as well. To some degree it has happened. But the good advantage for White Plains, you're a White Plains resident watching this, the
Right.
really great news is that the 2 places that we operate right now are in White Plains. And it's right here
And the
where we
county
can get
center,
people through it.
really efficient and very courteous. And you get done when they say they're going to do you.
Congratulate Westchester Medical Center and their staff, WMC Health. Congratulate the state of New York and congratulate the county workforce. You know, I'm the guy at the top of the pyramid. I shouldn't take a bow for somebody else's hard work, but we have good people in this government
Well,
that are doing a good job.
It is a really good setup. It's 100% better than the DMV.
Well, county doesn't run the
100%.
DMV.
Right. Exactly. Right. Now, You have, with the 6 other county executives, have endorsed sports opening up
Yes.
in the education level. And did you have any information that the athletes who played soccer, for example, this past fall, did not have a high rate of infections?
Well, I think what we saw
Yeah.
is that in the school setting and the school sports setting, because the school sports setting is more controlled than the community recreation setting or the independent league setting, we have had much less spread of the infection in that entity. So as we looked at it and we talked with the other county executives elsewhere in the county, because we're all linked, in high school sports, we're linked by Section 1. That's the association that covers this region of the state. And Rockland isn't going to do something that Putnam isn't going to do. We'll get on the same page. And I would point out that's one example, people don't see it, of bipartisan cooperation. Of the 6 counties in the Hudson Valley, from Ulster, Dutchess, and South, 2 county executives, Democrat, 4 Republican, and we figured out how to sit down and hammer this thing out so it was acceptable to everybody, which is a good thing. Now, just as I said, and I know you covered this back in the spring when we were opening certain things, I said, if it doesn't work, we'll close it down. If things get out of control, we're not committed, this is it no matter what happens. We're committed to going forward. I think it can be managed well. I think we'll get through the season well, and we'll make an assessment for these high-risk sports. Me personally, George Latimer, you know, I watch collegiate sports and professional sports, and I see basketball and I see football being played. They're managing the process, so it tells me that it can be managed. Wrestling, I don't know. But, you know, I guess we're leaving it to each school to try to figure out how to do it under the protocol, and if they can, then they should be able to do it.
Yeah, the schools have not been a big source of infections throughout the county.
And I think that's a good sign.
That's right. Now, as far as sports returning, what are Dr. Andler's recommendations? Testing all members of every team beginning of each week, for example? Or at schools, districts choosing to play? Or are her guidelines not decided yet?
We're following the guidelines from the state of New York.
Yeah.
Whatever the state DOH directs us to do in terms of testing and isolation, we do. And so we've communicated with the state because they're the ones that kicked the decision down to the local levels. They said about a week ago, well, you know, you can play as long as your local DOH approves. And we
so
said,
the DOH has to make the decisions of how they play.
But we said, you know, from the DOH level, well, you have given us certain standards of what we have to do, and when we have to test, and when we have to isolate, and how we handle spectators, which you can't fill the stadium, you know, or the basketball stands with people, and so we're going to follow those rules, and then we're going to play, and then we're going to see what happens, and do we have an outbreak and a spread? You saw, following this year's sports, you had a truncated playoffs in basketball and hockey. You had a smaller regular season that, you know, the results were a bit like much. But when the Miami Marlins had a problem, the whole team shut down and the games were forfeited. And that will happen if a given high school has an outbreak. We're not going to let teams play if one of them is, you know, across the board infected.
Right. And now, the Westchester housing sales are up, and so are prices across the board. Is this pricing Westchester out of reach for many of employees of companies and businesses that might move here?
Well, you know, you have a question here, and the answer to this question leads to the answer to this question. Then there's always a yin and yang in everything.
Of course,
so the
yes.
demand for housing in Westchester County is higher. It does drive prices higher. It does make it harder for people to afford residential units, which is why we need affordable housing built so that people who don't have market rate salaries can afford to pay them.
Now, are commercial property owners and banks participating with the county to ease foreclosure procedures, non-payment of rents?
Well, you start out with the fact
the governor
that
has.
yes, he's put a ban. He's put a ban on all of this stuff. There's commercial as well as residential. It's going to be lifted at some point in time, and when it does, we're going to get a flood, and the flood of evictions are going to be pretty pronounced. Now, with mortgages and with commercial real estate, it's a little bit different. Most of these businesses, the owners, the real estate owners, know that their businesses don't want to go under, and they don't want to lose their space that they have. They have responsibility to whoever loaned them the money to do the complex in the beginning, and so really the effort is being made across the board. to try to dampen down the desire to say, hey, you owe me all this money, give it to me. Then you turn to somebody else and say, give me the money, I don't have it, I go out of business, and I go bankruptcy. That doesn't solve the financial